We are back. It is fight season. It's me, Jesse Rowe, with Inside Fighting, and I'm rolling solo this week because last night, UFC President Dana White went on Instagram Live and made a whole variety of fight changes, fight announcements, major breaking news with major implications for the featherweight division, the lightweight division. So I just want to sort of get into that, break it all down, give you guys my takes, and sort of just recap all of the huge announcements and news that were announced last night by the UFC president. And the first off, biggest story of the night was that Ilia Topuria, the UFC featherweight champion, is vacating his featherweight belt to make a move up to lightweight. Apparently, he's doesn't want to do the weight cut anymore. He feels like he cemented his legacy at featherweight. But I don't need to tell you. You can hear it from the horse's mouth himself. Here's Dana White last night on Instagram Live.
All right. UFC 314 on April 12th, live from Miami, Florida. Tickets are on sale Friday, Ticketmaster.com. Number one ranked former champion Alex Volkanovski will be taking on number 3 ranked Diego Lopes for the vacant UFC featherweight title.
So Volk versus Lopes will be the UFC featherweight title in Miami. Now, I don't know if I'm reading into this too much, but does Dana sound a little like annoyed when he has to announce this news? That was kind of the vibe I was getting. Maybe I'm reading into it too wrong. Let me know what you guys think. But here, let's just listen to what he has to say about why this is happening.
Topuria has felt like he's done all that he can in that division, and he feels like he's cemented his legacy, and his body cannot make the weight anymore. So Topuria will be moving up to 155 pounds and will be vacating the featherweight title. So the way that this works is,
Dana sounds a little annoyed when he has to bring that up. But yeah, so Topuria says that he's done everything he can at featherweight. I mean, it's hard to argue. He knocked out Volkanovski and Max Holloway, arguably the 2 greatest UFC featherweights of all time. He's always said he wanted to move up to lightweight eventually. So really, in reality, it's kind of hard to argue that there was more for him to do. Yes, of course, he could fight Yair. He could fight Lopes. He could fight Evloev. But I think Topuria really is following that Conor McGregor mold of thinking bigger, more outside the box, bigger fights, more legacy fights. We're going to get into that after this, but just here's a little bit more what Dana has to say.
As soon as the first punch is thrown in this fight, the title is vacated. And we will announce what Topuria's next fight will be when we get it done.
Okay, so they will announce what Topuria's next fight is when they get it done. So what does this mean? Well, let's just go to here. Let's go back here. Let's just start with the Volk angle of this. So Volkanovski versus Lopes. I mean, look, if I'm being perfectly honest, I think this is like best case scenario here for Volk. Obviously, he wants to get that rematch with Topuria. Obviously, he wants to get that one back. But I think most fight fans, myself included, would say this is not a good matchup for Volk. We saw the way it ended last time. He basically got flatlined in Anaheim. Nobody wants to see that again. Obviously, Diego Lopes is a very dangerous fighter and has all the ability in the world to knock out Volkanovski. But it just feels like a less scary matchup, I guess I would say, for Volk. It doesn't feel as much of like a high risk matchup. It doesn't feel like there's an inevitable outcome in this one the way it felt with a Topuria fight. My guess is the odds will be very close on this fight, much closer than the Topuria fight would be. So good for Volkanovski. And I was reading off a stat. Volkanovski this is his, I think, 10th straight title fight. So he has not been in a non-title fight since 2019. He has been in nothing but title fights since 2019. And that trend continues in April at UFC 314 for Diego Lopes. This is an amazing opportunity for him. This is best case scenario too, because if Topuria had stayed at featherweight, it seems like Lopes would have had to wait until the UFC did the Volkanovski-Topuria rematch. So this is just best case scenario. Me personally, Volk is over 35. We know how fighters do over 35. He's coming off of getting knocked out twice in a row to Topuria and Islam. I don't love As much as I think this is a better matchup for him, I still feel like this feels like Diego Lopes's fight to lose, if I'm being honest, even though I know that Volkanovski is one of the greatest of all time. I just think that Lopes is on such a heater. This is such a huge opportunity for him. I don't think he's going to waste it. And I am worried that this will be the last time that we see Alex Volkanovski competing for a featherweight title. Could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but that's sort of the way I'm looking at this. But yeah, the number 1 ranked versus the number 3 ranked featherweight. It's a great main event for Miami. And right after this, I'm not going to play the whole Dana White video, but right after this, Dana also announced that in the co-main event of this fight will be, this one's a doozy. Paddy Pimblett versus Michael Chandler. We heard some rumblings about this fight being rumored for a few weeks, and it has come to fruition. It's incredible matchmaking by the UFC. Just forget the obvious reasons that Chandler is a much older veteran versus the up-and-comer in Pimblett. But this has huge implications just in terms of like what happens for both guys' careers if they win or lose. If Chandler loses this fight, it's kind of feeling like the big money fights are off the table for him. It feels like that ship will have sailed. If you can't beat the up-and-coming prospect, no matter how exciting you are in the cage, it's not a good look to lose to a guy that's that the best opponent that he's faced so far is Bobby Green. So it's definitely, I guess you could say Tony Ferguson as well, but as it stands right now, Bobby Green. So huge implications for Chandler, and if he wins, he keeps himself in that money fight contention. He's always going to be in title fight contention simply because he's so exciting. I mean, they literally just matched him up against Charles Oliveira when Chandler is like 2-4 in the UFC. So the UFC clearly likes him. For Paddy Pimblett, massive opportunity, obviously, to get a name like Chandler on your ledger, to get that pelt on your wall would be just massive for his ability to jump the rankings, to get into the title picture. Then you're going to start seeing people talking about, Pimblett versus Oliveira, Pimblett versus Sarukian, Pimblett versus Gaethje. There's going to be all sorts of conversations about that, and that's exactly where Paddy Pimblett wants to be. But if he loses, it's a major step back, losing to probably the most beatable guy in the top 10. I know, no disrespect to Michael Chandler, but it's a very stacked division. It's a very tough division, probably the most dense and difficult division in the UFC, or one of them. You got to be able to beat Michael Chandler, because most people would argue he might be one of the weaker links of the top 10 simply because he's 2-4 since coming into the UFC. And he's a guy that will leave openings for you, struggles against high-level jiu-jitsu grapplers, things like that. It's a big-time star-making opportunity for Paddy Pimblett. It's certainly not the Conor McGregor fight that Michael Chandler was hoping for, but the guy's a Scouser from Liverpool, so close enough, Michael. Is this one close enough for you? I don't know. I still think it's a huge fight, and there's going to be so many eyeballs on this. It's going to be crazy. This fight will be crazy because Pimblett leaves his chin up a lot. I could definitely see Chandler winning this one. There's a high level of success, percentage of success for Chandler in this fight. But I could also see Pimblett backpacking him and getting the submission, and this will be an exciting fight. Supposedly it's going to be 5 rounds too, which is great. Another fight that was added to the UFC Miami card. Patricio Pitbull is going to be making his UFC debut. Patricio Pitbull is the former Bellator double division champion. He tried to move to a 3rd division, but he lost to Sergio Pettis. But he is a legend, arguably the greatest Bellator fighter ever. And going up against Yair Rodrigues in the featherweight division. So they're taking on each other at UFC 314 in Miami. And I think it's just, again, great matchmaking. It's a great way to measure Patricio Pitbull in the UFC. He's 37 years old, fighting a young, I think Yair's like 30, fighting an experienced but still somewhat young Yair Rodrigues, a guy that's still in the title picture. It's a great measuring stick for both guys, and it sort of gives us a clear barometer, a clear look at how much Patricio Pitbull has left and how he stacks up against the UFC and if he can actually make some noise. Because we've seen with like Reiner de Ritter coming into the UFC, fighting a guy like Kevin Holland, that was sort of like a good measuring stick barometer. Same with Gerald Meerschaert, fighting Gerald Meerschaert. The UFC is very good at this. And I think this is kind of perfect matchmaking to find out what you have with Patricio Pitbull, who was a big star in another organization, but might just be another guy in the UFC. You know, we don't know yet. We don't know yet. So that's going to be a fun one to see as well. Are there any other fights that were announced? Yes. Jeff Neal versus Carlos Prates was also added to this card. Sorry, I don't have the graphic here. I think I messed up. But Jeff Neal versus Carlos Prates. So that's a massive fight, massive opportunity for Prates coming off of knocking out Neil Magny. This is the fight that will put him into the title picture. And I love Jeff Neal, but I see Prates walking away with that one. So we're going to get into a few more fight announcements, but let's talk about Topuria here, because that's the big story. Why did Ilia Topuria vacate his belt? Well, last night he posted this on his Instagram page. He posted an AI-generated image of himself wearing a crown on a throne with his UFC belt, and the caption is "Not Like Us," channeling Kendrick Lamar's hit song, and he even played the song in his Instagram post with the music playing from the song. And what does this mean? There are a bunch of different ways to interpret it, but it kind of feels like Ilia pulled a power move here. It kind of feels like Ilia really flexed his star power on the UFC, willingly vacated his belt because yes, he doesn't want to cut weight anymore. Yes, he feels like his legacy is set. He's never going to beat anybody bigger than Volkanovski or Max Holloway. There's nobody bigger that he could beat in the featherweight division. So his legacy is set there. Now he clearly wants to move up to lightweight, and he wants the Islam Makhachev fight. And this post to me suggests that he got his wish. It suggests to me that he played his hand perfectly, that the UFC wants to make this fight happen, that they recognize what a star they have in Topuria, and that he is the closest thing, other than Sean O'Malley, he's the closest thing the UFC has to Conor McGregor, has to that level of star power. Because not many guys at the UFC could pull a move like this. Maybe John Jones could, but then again, you know, John Jones is huge, but Ilia Topuria has like international appeal that John Jones doesn't have. And if you're thinking that the Islam fight doesn't seem possible, well, last night Ariel Helwani put out a tweet, and he basically implied, and we retweeted it, but he basically implied that the UFC is looking to make this fight, Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria. Ilia will just jump right into the title picture. He'll fight Islam for the belt. It looks like they're targeting International Fight Week, if the reporting is to be believed. This is Topuria following the Conor McGregor playbook to a T. He's just getting the Khabib fight a few fights earlier than Conor did. This is basically Conor versus Khabib 2.0. This is probably the biggest fight the UFC can put on right now. Is it bigger than Jones versus Aspinall? It's a good debate. I think because Jones and Aspinall are in the heavyweight division, it's the biggest division. John Jones is the greatest, fighter of all time. I think that fight probably is bigger in the UFC's eyes, but I think in the eyes of fans, this is the fight that the fans are most interested in. And if this is actually happening, I am so excited. And I think that this is it's an incredible risk by Islam to allow it to happen, but it seems like Islam is like the most game champion of all time. I mean, the UFC has that quote on the wall at the UFC PI about how the job of the champion isn't to decide who your opponent is. True champions just accept whoever is in front of them. And if this is who is in front of him, then Islam Makhachev is going to accept it. And also, he has to be smart enough to know what an incredible money-making opportunity this is. To beat a guy like Topuria, I think would essentially solidify his stance for Islam, his stance that he wins this fight, the UFC will have no choice but to move him up to become double champ at 170 to go for the ultimate legacy win. Because that's what we all know Islam wants, right? He wants to move up to 170, but he has to wait until Belal Muhammad is no longer the champion. There is talk about Islam potentially moving up to 185 to fight DDP. That just seems so unlikely. Dana White kind of poured cold water on that, and DDP I think would just be too big for Islam. But this, as of right now, Ilia is a pretty big underdog. Some betting sites have him as like a plus 230. Islam is like in the minus 250 range, which makes sense to me, but I still think that this is an incredible matchup. And if this fight stays on its feet, if Ilia is able to stuff the takedowns, it's a problem for Islam on the feet with the boxing and power of Ilia. Even though he's a division below, I do think Ilia is a little bit more of a natural lightweight. Maybe a smaller lightweight, but more of a natural lightweight versus Islam, who is a bigger lightweight, probably more of a natural welterweight. Just an incredible fight if this happens. And I think it would be arguably one of the top 10 fights of all time put on by the UFC if it happens. Maybe I'm being a little hyperbolic, prisoner of the moment, but let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think Islam would dominate this, or do you guys think Topuria has a puncher's chance? I lean towards the latter. I think Topuria is just so special. I don't think this will be an easy night for Islam whatsoever. I think it'd be a long night for him, and I think it would. I think people are going to be surprised how well Ilia would do in this matchup. So, what do you guys think about Ilia vacating the belt? Do you feel like this was a mistake? I saw MMA Guru saying that he believes that the UFC is more likely to do Ilia versus Poirier, like in a contenders match, and then Ilia could fight for the title. But from my standpoint, it just doesn't make sense for you to vacate the title. Vacate your belt with all the perks that come with that, all the benefits you get from it, all the star power you get from it. Vacating your title for a contenders match to move up a division doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It seems way more likely that Ilia has this fight locked down, and it's going to happen at some point later this year. So that's where I fall on it. In terms of the other fights that were announced, because there were some big ones. Leon Edwards has a new opponent for UFC London on March 22nd. Sean Brady is stepping up on short notice. He's replacing Della Maddalena in the main event. It's essentially a number one contenders bout. And, whoever wins, Sean Brady's on a bit of a win streak, but he's fighting Leon Edwards, who just lost to Belal Muhammad, who is the only person, and Sean Brady is the only person that Belal Muhammad has ever finished in the UFC. Kind of a weird little crossover in the Venn diagram there, but I definitely think it's a slightly tougher matchup for Edwards here, just because Brady is so wrestling and grappling heavy and takedown heavy that's not something that Edwards wants to see after the last fight against Belal. But Edwards has accepted it, and Brady is stepping in. It's still a great main event, but now you're asking what's going on here with Della Maddalena. Well, he is being moved into a title shot versus Belal Muhammad at UFC 315 on May 10th in Montreal, Quebec. The UFC has announced the welterweight division is in a crazy spot right now. You're probably wondering what's going on with Shavkat Rakhmonov, who just had a face-off with Belal Muhammad at UFC 310 after beating Ian Gary. That was supposed to be the fight. Well, apparently Shavkat is injured. The UFC needed a main event for UFC 315. So they've put in Della Maddalena. Much easier matchup for Belal just from a grappling standpoint. But JDM is no joke. He's undefeated. He's got great slick boxing, good takedown defense. He's a really complete fighter, and I do love Jack. But it seems like obviously we all want to see Shavkat finally fight for the title because it feels like that's supposed to be the fight. Well, I think either way, we were going to see JDM fighting for the title in the next couple of fights either way. So we're just jumping the line a little bit here. It seems like Shavkat has his title shot locked up when he's healthy. So whoever wins this fight, Shavkat will fight the winner of the fight. And so whether it's JDM or whether it's Belal, Shavkat will step in. So it doesn't, from his standpoint, it kind of doesn't matter. And it might be even a little bit of a better scenario for him to get Belal out of there, maybe, or just to get a little extra damage under Belal's belt during his time as champion. So it kind of just makes sense from that standpoint. But for JDM, does it make a lot of sense for him to be the guy? Well, just look at the state of the welterweight division. You can't do Ian Gary coming off of a loss. You could do Joaquin Buckley, but he's only beaten kind of like a washed up Colby Covington, Wonder Boy, who is like past his prime. It seems like might be just like one fight too early for Buckley, even though he might be the next logical choice. But then you look down the line, like Carlos Prates hasn't beaten enough people yet. You haven't seen, Jeff Neal's coming off of losses. There's just not a lot of options for that division. And to me, this makes the most sense with where we're at, because Sean Brady can't jump the line either. He couldn't jump Jack Della Maddalena. He has to get a big win under his belt, and this makes the most sense. So, what do you guys think of this main event? I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it. I think Belal takes it, but I don't think you should sleep on JDM here. But in the co-main event, Valentina Schevchenko versus Manon Fiorot for the women's flyweight championship. My first reaction was somewhat surprised, because I thought that the UFC would consider making the Zhang Weili versus Schevchenko fight. But it seems like Schevchenko needs a fight. She's been on the shelf for a while, since September at Noche UFC. So they need to get her. They need to get her back in there. And Manon Fiorot, she's been waiting a long time. She's earned the title shot. And yeah, it's a great matchup. It's the best matchup, but it's a huge risk for Schevchenko, just in terms of potentially there being a bigger fight, one of the biggest women's fights that you can make, against Zhang Weili. So if Schevchenko loses this fight, she loses the chance at fighting Weili, which would just be a much, 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 much bigger fight. I mean, just Russia versus China, big time markets, big time stars, legends of the sport. It would be a legend versus legend battle. That's the fight that we all want to see here. But I still, it's obviously, this is if not the Weili fight, this was the fight to make. And I like it, but Schevchenko by unanimous decision. So yeah, I think that is everything. So obviously this just shook up the world yesterday. And we're in a crazy time for UFC. This was sort of unexpected, but this is why the UFC is the best sport in the world, guys. Ilia Topuria vacates his belt, doesn't bat an eye. We all go crazy about it, but there's plans being made. There's reasoning behind it. There is four-dimensional chess going on behind the scenes between Ilia and the UFC. There's all sorts of shakeup in the welterweight division. What does this do for the future of featherweight if Diego Lopes becomes champion? What does it do if Volkanovski becomes champion? Who does Volkanovski face if he beats Diego Lopes? Does Max Holloway go back down? Do we get that quadrilogy fight? I mean, there are so many different outcomes here. So much to talk about. But I just wanted to update you guys, give you guys a little rundown of all the announcements, and give you guys my take. And let me know what you guys think. Which fight are you most excited for? Do you think Ilia is making a mistake? Do you think Ilia has a chance at beating Islam? Do you think Ilia might fight somebody like Poirier instead of Islam? Do you feel like he's deserving of the title shot? Let me know in the comments. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the Inside Fighting YouTube channel. Thank you guys for all your support. We'll see you next time.